So we'll go ahead and get started today with our CyberSchool on single button intercoms. I chose to break out the intercom CyberSchools into one for single buttons and then one into keypads, because when we deal with security code entry, that can really be a CyberSchool on its own. That's such an in-depth topic, and it's really something that we should try to give the necessary time for that. So we'll split this up essentially into two different parts over two different CyberSchool sessions. So the products that we'll be covering today are, of course, the outdoor intercom, the outdoor video intercom, the indoor intercoms, both flush mount and wall mount, the emergency intercom, and the call buttons. So what does an intercom do? An intercom is a two-way communication point at the entrances to different facilities or businesses. It's primarily used for access control for gates, doors, or just regular entrances, and it can also double as an emergency notification endpoint. Now, why would you want to use an intercom? Intercoms are convenient two-way communication devices for entrances, and it allows a really easy way for somebody that wants to gain access to a facility to simply press a button and communicate with somebody indoors. It's very useful for people indoors because they don't really have to get interrupted in their work. They can just quickly answer a phone call and communicate with the person on the exterior of the building and allow them access if necessary. In our current world, it's also very useful for social distancing, because that way, again, since you don't actually have to see or, physically in person communicate with a person that wants to gain entrance to the facility, that way you can maintain social distance and not transmit any potential diseases. So it grows ever increasingly useful in our modern world. It's also a simple way to implement access control. Typically, when you're dealing with larger enterprise-grade access control, that requires individual card readers or specialized intercoms at particular entranceways and a whole server, and there can really be a lot of bells and whistles and problems and headaches that can be involved with doing a full-fledged access control system. So things like an intercom are very powerful for controlling one or two different doors or just a couple entrances through a facility. Instead of going out and spending, tens of thousands of dollars on a full-fledged access control system, a simple, couple $100 intercom and a door strike can allow easy access control at a location for a very economical cost. It's also a really great way of tracking entrance and just usage of a particular entranceway or a doorway, because all of the calls that are made from the intercom are going to be logged in the call log of a particular phone system. That way they'll know who received the call from the intercom. If it calls a ring group, it'll actually show who received the call, but it's a great way to track, say, if somebody actually does gain access to the facility that isn't supposed to have access, what time that call was made and who answered the call. So that way security and the necessary parties can begin tracking down and determining the issue and why that actually happened. And again, it doubles as a notification endpoint. So that's mainly useful in places where you'd be dealing with, say, areas where people would congregate, say like a waiting room at a doctor's office or an outdoor seating area, say at a restaurant or outside a restaurant if somebody's waiting for their table. It's just a very powerful endpoint that can also double as a notification device. So where can intercoms be used? Intercoms are typically used at different entranceways. Of course, your front door, your back door, your parking lots. Basically any place that somebody would go to gain access to a particular facility. But other kind of out-of-the-box areas where intercoms can be used are things like waiting rooms, outdoor seating areas, or even just generally on school campuses. For things like waiting rooms, they're very useful to make notification to particular parties that might have to wait in some kind of a queue system to actually be able to do whatever they're doing in that particular facility. So things like a doctor's office, an intercom could be very useful for the different attendees and people at the doctor's office to communicate with the different people to let them know that the doctor's ready to see them. So instead of that particular nurse going out with their checklist and say, okay, Mr. So-and-so, the doctor is ready in room 3, please come back, they can just simply announce it over the intercom, tell the person what they need to do, and that way they can maintain social distance at a doctor's office. So it's extremely useful for that. Can be also useful for restaurants, and it's an easy way for a restaurant to let people know, say if they're waiting in an outside seating area, if their table's ready. I don't know how many people are eating at an inside table now with everything going on, but it's definitely useful in those types of situations. It's also useful in places like school campuses, say for outdoor lunch areas for kids, or even college students that might be hanging out outside in kind of an open grassy area with a few picnic tables. They might just be hanging out. It could be a great way to facilitate emergency communication where they wouldn't necessarily want a full-fledged phone. You know, really an intercom can be used anywhere that communication is necessary, but a standard phone with a regular handset isn't ideal. You know, places where the, you know, any phones that you could get, say for example, if they're outdoor rated, might, you know, be priced out of your price range, or it might not be a good idea to have a handset out there because it could be kind of in a sketchy area and somebody could come over and, you know, try to hold you up and wring your neck or something with a phone cord. So, you know, there's lots of different applications in places where an intercom can be used if you need that two-way communication. So now that we've covered kind of the what, why, and where intercoms can be used, let's talk a little bit about specifics. So one of the good features that we have with one of our intercoms is the circuit board terminal that we, or the actual terminal block that we have on the circuit board. So this is primarily the connection point for a lot of different things that you can do with the intercom, and there's basically 8 different pins that we can work with that are split off into 4 different sets of pairs. As we go from left to right here, we've got pins 1 and 2, which are going to be our alternate power source. So if somebody doesn't have that PoE connectivity at the particular location where the intercom is being used, they can use a standard wall outlet and a pretty standard 8 to 12 volt DC 1000 milliamp regulated power supply to actually go and power the intercom. They're of course still going to need a regular Ethernet cable to provide that network connectivity, but sometimes when they can't necessarily provide that PoE power at that particular location, they don't want to go and shell out for an intercom or a PoE injector at that particular site. Makes it very advantageous to go for that route. Moving on, we've got pin 3 and 4, our relay common and our relay normally open contact. So those are the 2 contact points that we'll use with a door strike relay. Then pins 5 and 6, we've got the sense input, and sense ground, which are essentially the inverse of a relay, where a relay will close and an action can be taken. Our sense input expects a relay to close so that way we can take an action, essentially the inverse of a standard relay. Then finally, we've got pins 7 and 8, which are our remote switch ports, and that can be used as essentially a secondary call button. Where you can actually go and short those 2 pins together, essentially take a little bit of wire and connect pins 7 and 8, and it'll effectively work like pressing the front call button of an intercom. So now we can kind of get into the onboard terminal relay. So the onboard terminal, or the onboard relay, is a relay that's rated to 1 amp at 30 volt DC. So we're really kind of dealing with your low voltage relays. Things that would just take a little bit of power and wouldn't necessarily require the high beefiness that you would get from, say, a gate controller or something that would require a little bit more power. Of course, if you're dealing with something like that, you know, you would want to use the networked dual door strike relay that we learned about last week. But you know, for some instances, you can use our general onboard relay. It really depends on the power rating of the particular door strike that we're connecting to, and then the impedance load, as well as the kind of inductiveness to the circuit. Without spending an entire day talking about all of that stuff, as long as it's low voltage, we're probably good to go, but it's always a safe bet getting one of the door strike accessories. So all CyberData intercoms across the board have this normally open, temporarily closed style relay. Again, this is shared across the circuit board, so technically speaking, anything from our indoor intercom to our outdoor intercom to one of our strobes, or even our call buttons, all have the same underlying circuit board, and thus will have that normally open, temporarily closed style relay, which is primarily used to open doors or gates, but they also have different inventive uses, say like triggering what typically is referred to like a whirly-bird strobe that you would imagine, say, on older police cars. There's lots of different use cases that you can use a regular relay for. Next, we get into relay activation, you know, because it's all well and good to know what pins actually connect to that particular relay point, but you need to know how to activate the relay. So there's 3 different ways to activate the relay on any of our intercom products. We've got relay pulse, relay activation, and relay deactivation. Relay pulse will activate the relay for a certain amount of time set by the relay pulse duration, and that's of course measured in seconds. Then we've got activate relay and deactivate relay. And those do literally just that. They activate the relay or they deactivate the relay. So for example, sending the activate relay code will close the relay, and the relay will be closed until either the deactivate relay code is sent or the intercom is rebooted, which will return it to the standard normally open state. So why would you want to do that? It's really useful for times where you need to have a door to be unlocked for a longer period of time. Say, for example, if you've got an intercom at the facility and you're getting a large delivery, or you're actually moving out of that particular facility, and you're going to have people going in and out of that particular doorway, and you don't want to have the door just consistently lock or unlock itself as the door actually closes, you can just send that relay activation code, and the door will stay permanently unlocked. It can also be useful for some businesses or certain doors due to local fire code that have to have a particular door unlocked and able to be used due to fire restrictions in that particular area. So there's a lot of different functions and reasons that you would want to use relay activation and relay deactivation. However, relay pulse is the primary way that I'd say a large portion of our customer base actually interact with the relay. And it's always funny, and this is something that support always deals with, where customers will call in and say, hey, we just installed an intercom and we got the door to open, but now it won't lock. What do we do? And it's like, okay, which code do you use? And they're like, oh, 456. And it's like, oh, well, you just activated the relay. You got to deactivate the relay. And you know, it typically involves a lot of explanation on those 3 different relay options. So that's just one of the things that we typically encounter and support. But again, the predominant way that people will interact with a relay is using the relay pulse code. These different codes can be set through a various different range of digits that can actually be used, as low as 1 digit, and I want to say as high as 8 or 9 digits. It can be actually fairly complex if somebody wants that hard of a relay code, if they want to basically punch in an entire phone number to activate the onboard relay. Most users end up picking, you know, either a single digit or sometimes up to 3 or 4 digits, but you know, they have the ability to set a fairly long pulse code if they want to. We've also got a couple different things that we can do with the relay that come in a form of checkboxes. We can, of course, you know, activate the relay during the ring, activate the relay during night ring, activate the relay when the call is active, or activate the relay on button press. However, these options are sparingly used, simply because it might not be ideal to have the intercom actually unlock the door when the intercom is ringing and the person inside the facility hasn't even spoken with that particular person. You know, you kind of want to have the intercom to confirm that the person can actually gain access to the building. So it's, you know, it's kind of important maybe not to use those settings. They can definitely be very useful in certain situations, especially say the activate relay during night ring. Okay, yeah, thank you, Cameron. It's 25 characters max for relay activation. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous if somebody wants to set something, you know, that high. They can do it, but I've never seen anybody do that. Frankly, the majority of customers that I speak with set it at a single digit. They want to just press 9 to unlock the door, pound, because you can also set either star or pound, basically any key that's on your standard phone to actually trigger our onboard relay. But of these optional checkbox settings that we have to interact with the relay, the most useful setting that customers will use is the play tone during DTMF activation. And that's strictly useful just because, you know, from a lot of movies that people watch, you know, when you're watching somebody, you know, that's trying to go up to, you know, somebody's apartment complex and they're talking at, you know, an intercom, oh, buzz me in, you know, they buzz them and, you know, you get that little, you know, that funny comedic joke where they buzz them and they try the door's not open, oh, buzz me in. They, you know, they keep trying the door and they can't get in. You know, and everybody's kind of ingrained after, you know, Hollywood kind of introducing that when a door is activated by an onboard relay, they expect some kind of a buzz tone. So we have a feature like that. And basically what that does is anytime that the relay is activated via DTMF for the pulse code, the intercom will play a tone. So the length of this particular tone is of course dependent on the relay pulse duration. And this is an uploadable audio file if a customer wants to change it. Generally, it's just kind of a loud beep tone that we play, but as like any audio file on a CyberData device, they can go and upload their own custom audio file if they don't like our buzz tone and they want something comical or, you know, whatever they want, they can upload it if they desire. So it's a really useful feature on there, but frankly, that's the most useful checkbox option that we have in terms of the relay settings. Predominantly, people will use the relay pulse code and play tone during DTMF activation. Next, we get into the sense input. And sense input is predominantly a way to tell that a door has actually been closed after it was open for somebody to gain entrance to the facility. So again, it's just basically two pin connections on our terminal block that, when shorted together, or technically not shorted together, depending on the state, it's actually kind of cool. With the sense input, you can either set, you can basically set how that circuit is going to work. If the circuit is expected to be closed or if the circuit is expected to be open. And the differentiation between that just depends on the device that you're using to actually monitor the door being closed. Predominantly, people will use the little magnetic sensors to actually tell that a door has been closed. So that would be what's known as a normally closed style circuit, the actual default setting of the device. But how this is used is, say, for example, you let somebody have access to the facility, they come in, but it's not really a monitored door. They're not, say, coming into the front office where, the secretary is going to be sitting right there, and they get a little rock or something else and they stick that in the door jamb because they're going to case the joint and then rob it. So, like we have pictured here, somebody's got a rock in a door jamb, and because they've got a magnetic sense on that particular door, it calls security. Now, there's a couple different actions that the intercom can actually take when the sense input is triggered. It can, of course, just play a kind of annoying audio file through the actual speaker of the intercom. It just repeats over and over, door ajar, door ajar, door ajar, which, is just one good way for somebody to know, of course, if they're in close proximity, that the door is ajar. But you might also, especially when you're dealing with some kind of security, you might want to be a little bit more discreet. So it can call a particular extension, and this is a distinct extension that would be different than our standard call button extension. You press the call button and it's going to call one number. Well, the sense input can call a different number. And when it calls that particular number, it can, of course, just play our loud, annoying door ajar message to whoever actually receives the call, or it can be, again, a custom audio file. Or it can actually just open up the entire audio circuit and they can just basically hear what's going on live at the intercom. So, they might be able to hear some guy, rolling up with a cart that's getting ready to steal all the computers off all the desks or something. It can be a really, really useful feature when implemented. Next, we get to the remote switch connection on there. And these are pins 7 and 8. And again, they, when shorted together, they basically act like just pressing the front call button of the intercom. It's got kind of a unique use case where essentially all it does is it acts as a secondary switch to actually trigger and make a call from an intercom. So it can be useful in places where, say, especially for truckers, say if you're dealing with people with different size cabs, where it can be tough to go and mount an intercom for somebody to actually make a call. If you're dealing with different size cabs in the trucks. So you could have, the intercom mounted at, the kind of standard location that most of your truck drivers would deal with and would be able to interact with the intercom. And then you could have another call button that's strictly just a call button that would tie back down into pins 7 and 8 that could be activated by somebody in a higher cab of a truck. So that's just one of the different examples for it, but again, it really just acts like a secondary call button option, where when these two pins are shorted together, it makes a call to the dial-out extension of the intercom. Finally, we get to the intrusion sensor. So the intrusion sensor is a small little light sensor that's actually on the circuit board of the intercom. And again, since it's on the circuit board of the intercom, it's shared across our entire product line that'll use this same circuit board. So our indoor intercoms, our outdoor intercoms, our keypad intercoms, our single button intercoms, the call button, and the strobe. So everything that uses this same square circuit board will have the onboard light sensor. So what this sensor can do when it's activated, and it's very, very small distance to actually get the onboard light sensor to trigger, it can basically take two different actions. It can either make a call to a predetermined extension, and again, just like our door sense trigger, when it makes that call, it can just do live audio from the intercom, so they can hear, MacGyver taking the intercom off and chewing up that bubble gum, so he can pair it with his paper clip to do something. Who knows what that guy's going to do? Or it can just play a preloaded audio file to let somebody know that the light sensor has been triggered and they need to get security over there. Or it can just play audio locally through the actual speaker of the intercom in hopes to actually scare away that would-be aggressor. So you've got a couple different options there. It's frankly kind of an underutilized feature of a lot of our intercoms, but it's extremely powerful and really recommended to use when people are dealing with intercoms, especially for access control, where they've got kind of secure or kind of important equipment behind that particular door. You know, it's just another way to get a notification if something happens to the intercom after it's out there in the field. So kind of standard use cases for our intercoms. You know, it's pretty standard to use an intercom, but, you know, just as an example, you know, a front door intercom, you know, it can be located at the front of a building where, you know, customers would typically come up and interface with a particular building. They press the button and it makes a call to a security or a secretary, and they can have a short communication with the person. And if they want to, they can allow the person entry to the particular facility. Can also double as a parking lot intercom as we get into our second use case here. And that would be just kind of a different idea for that same implementation, where instead of people actually coming up to the front door to gain access to the facility, they got to park their car first. And then they've got an entranceway that they can utilize through the parking lot. And this is typically more where places where you're going to see more of a secure parking lot, something that's gated off, very akin to, say, the Monterey Airbus station that actually shares the cul-de-sac with us. Granted, their gate's almost always open, but this would be a great way that they could do to better secure all of the people's cars and what they keep up there for the Airbus station. You know, they could have an intercom there to just confirm the person that is trying to go in and gain access to the parking lot should actually be able to get there. Then finally, we kind of get to the other essentially very similar use case of an internal door intercom. So when you're dealing with bigger high-rise buildings or even doctor's offices or multi-tenant office buildings, you could have an intercom outside of the internal door for that particular area. So if you're dealing with, say, a law office in a high-rise building that might have, say, an exclusive floor, you know, we're talking, you know, an office in, you know, one of the big skyscrapers in New York, you know, they could have, you know, their nice little waiting room as you get off the elevator, and there's a nice little intercom that people can use to interact with to actually gain access to that particular law office. So the use case across intercoms are fairly standard. They've got kind of different iterations, but essentially they're used any place that you want to just have a two-way communication with someone. So here's kind of an example of a low voltage door strike connection where we'll be utilizing, of course, pins 3, 4, 5, and 6. Pins 3 and 4 get wired in line with the actual power for the door strike, and this is a common question that we get from a lot of customers, is where does the power source actually go? And depending on how much power is actually used to power the door strike and the type of door strikes that's used, and of course it depends on the hardware that we're connecting to, but a lot of the times the power actually has to be run through our particular onboard relay, which is why we can't deal with a lot of the higher power gate controllers or things that are going to use a real beefy kind of a lock or anything. You know, if it's running a lot of power through it, you don't want to run it through our device because we're not rated for that. But if you're dealing with something that's kind of low power, you can run it directly through our terminal connection points there. The low voltage door strike be replaced with a magnetic lock? It cannot. It cannot. Great question, Cameron. Great question. So one of the things that you deal with when you're dealing with a magnetic lock is you're dealing with a different style of circuit. So a magnetic lock requires what's known as a normally closed, temporarily open style circuit, because a magnetic lock requires power to actually energize the lock because they use electromagnets. So as long as that power is there, the magnet is engaged, and that magnet is pulling on that big steel plate to keep the door closed literally just with that magnetic force. So then when the relay is activated, it breaks that circuit, so the magnet is no longer powered, and the door will actually be able to be opened. But that requires, again, what's known as a normally closed, temporarily open style circuit. And ours is the inverse, where we're normally open, temporarily closed. So because of that, you cannot connect a mag lock directly to one of our intercoms. And of course, you need to use one of our accessory door strike utilities. But of course, we all know that. We're all experts on that after last week's CyberSchool, learning all about the network dual door strike relay. Finally, we get, of course, to pins 5 and 6 here, which would just be our magnetic sense inputs. So these, of course, like we have pictured here, are just going to be our little magnetic senses that will be able to tell when the door has actually been closed. And again, if it hasn't been closed, the intercom can take a particular action. So this is just kind of a good illustration of not only how the whole system will integrate, but where all the pins will actually go and how the connection actually works, because that's kind of important to be able to sell. And of course, it's just taken directly from our website. Great job on this, Alan. We move on here. Let's see, message from Mauricio here. Some newer model door strikes and controllers have the ability to switch between either normally open and normally closed. That's a great point, Mauricio. Yeah, we're really kind of dependent on the hardware that we're connecting to. So it can really depend what the customer is actually implementing there, which is one of the reasons that Mauricio always recommended for customers that aren't sure, or installers that aren't sure what type of hardware is going to be at the particular location, to get one of our network dual door strike relays, or even the intermediate door strike relay, because then they're equipped to handle either. But sometimes they can also handle that directly with the door strike itself, because the door strike itself can handle either connection point. Granted, that's usually the more expensive door strikes, which is just something you'll have to deal with, when you're dealing with, kind of a more feature-rich door strike or a gate controller. You're going to be paying a higher price, which is, the same to say across, most products or just about anything out there. So now we can kind of get into the call button, and why I'm kind of grouping the call button in with the intercoms here. So the call button, at an essence, you press the button and it sends a message. And this can either be a SIP call, or it can actually send that multicast message. So in the essence, it's essentially the same as an intercom, granted, of course, with some major distinctions, where, of course, since the call button doesn't have an onboard speaker or a microphone, you of course can't have a two-way you can't have that two-way communication. But there's certain instances where that's acceptable. You don't necessarily need to talk to the particular person that pressed the call button, because with the call button, of course, you can upload a custom audio file, and that audio file can give enough description to whoever's getting the call from the particular call button. So it's extremely useful in certain scenarios. Kind of just went through this, but both products kind of share a similar goal. You press a button and it sends a message. One of them you can have a two-way communication, with the other you can't, but they both kind of achieve a very similar end goal. They both also share the same underlying circuit board. So they've got, essentially an equivalent feature set, both having an onboard terminal, both having that door sense or the remote switch connection. Of course, again, the standard intercom has a microphone or a speaker, so they're a little bit more useful in certain situations. But they've got, some very distinct features and, some reasons that you would want to get call buttons over in intercoms. And really, that kind of comes down to the particular use case that you're using the call button in. Overall, intercoms are extremely useful, but there's certain situations where a call button is just so much more powerful because of the simplicity that it adds to it. And that really, again, kind of depends on the use cases. So some major use cases where you would kind of want a call button over an intercom is, say, a panic button under the desk. You wouldn't really want an intercom down there because, the person that receives the call from that panic button might not realize that, the other end is a call button, or the other end is an intercom, and they start saying, hello, do you need help? While there's, a would-be aggressor that's on the other side that's now hearing this and can just really set off that aggression. So it can be very important, especially for panic buttons, for them to just be a one-way. You just press the button and nothing else goes on in that room. There might be a little blinky light, but hopefully they wouldn't be able to see that underneath the desk. Another just very standard use case for a call button is, needing assistance in a particular store. Anybody that kind of knew our old trade show setup is we always had the help needed in produce for our call buttons, and that's what it would always trigger, because that was one of the main use cases that we've always kind of demonstrated with the call button. You press the call button and it makes a call to CyberData. Oh, great question, Dan. Here, let's see. Would CyberData intercoms be a common occurrence in drive-through fast food or a drive-up bank tellers? Yeah, they definitely could be, Dan. They definitely could be, especially for, say, like drive-up bank tellers. I really wouldn't want to see.
Is anybody else hearing Paul? Because I'm not.
I can't hear him.
Paul, I think you may be cutting out there, Paul.
Tuttle, can't hear you.
I think my headset died.
Okay.
Headset died, just a second.
Is this the equivalent of a costume change?
Okay, I should be back. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. I ignored the warnings from my headset telling me the battery was low. My apologies. My apologies. So where did you lose me? When was I talking about Dan's question?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
To address
Yeah. Yeah, so just to kind of reiterate on that, Dan, yeah, I think intercoms are very valid for both either fast food drive-through or for dealing with a drive-up at a bank, just because people kind of assume that they're going to be dealing with a sort of speakerphone communication, where they're not really going to be picking up a handset or interacting with anybody. The one kind of caveat to that, especially when you're dealing with drive-throughs, is you really have to be able to account on the loudness of particular engines. And as somebody that dealt with drive-through in certain instances, hearing somebody over the roar of a diesel truck engine, you know, if you're dealing with, you know, an F-450 or something, or, you know, a big, you know, say like a Chevy, like it was some with a Hemi in it, like you ain't going to hear nothing over, you know, a pretty loud engine. So that's one thing to consider there. And typically when you're dealing with drive-through intercoms, because they're essentially at the base an intercom, they're going to be a little bit louder, and they're, yeah, like Cameron said, they're predominantly analog just because it's a little bit easier to work with. But yeah, we've already got an OEM version for pharmacies. A little bit of a pain, you know, because like Cameron said, you know, it's you know, you're dealing with that VoIP connection out there. So sometimes it's a lot easier to go analog. Like I know at least for the McDonald's that I worked at, granted that was like over 10 years ago now, it was all analog there because I was actually, I tried to help troubleshooting it a little bit, but when you're dealing with the fancy display screens and all the other stuff, that's all proprietary stuff, and they needed their techs from McDonald's to come out and service it. So predominantly, I wouldn't recommend, say, one of our intercoms for it. You want something kind of specialized for that, something, say, like the stuff that we did for Bavis. But it really kind of depends on the implementation. There are probably places where somebody could get away with using one of our intercoms, but predominantly, I think they're going to be using something kind of special for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We had done some audio work in years past, and I was trying to see if there's a possibility of pairing up some of the technology that I played with back then with the technology that's inside the intercom, but maybe it's just, you know, leave it be, and we've got plenty of resources that need to be put elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean,
big problem we've had. Sorry, Paul.
No, go ahead, Cameron, please.
The price point for the echo canceller. When you're taking an analog system, that's dirt cheap, right? It's a microphone, it's speaker, it's 4 wires. The echo canceller that we use for this Bavis project for these drive-throughs costs us upwards of $80 to $90. And so I think a lot of it might be a price point when somebody's looking at a solution of, you know, buying a $400 intercom plus a $100 echo canceller versus just buying a $100 echo canceller and using the analog equipment we already have on hand.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah, and as somebody that can at least speak from experience, when you're dealing with fast food drive-through, anytime that they have to spend money, they don't want to do it. So, yeah, but to continue on with some of our different use cases here, one way that I would always recommend, and I do this frequently with a lot of customers that I interact with that are looking for intercoms, or, you know, do you really actually need an intercom for that particular location? And, you know, I strictly kind of do this when you're dealing with delivery style areas, you know, kind of thinking Carmi at the loading dock. You know, when you get somebody at your loading dock, it's typically FedEx, UPS, or, you know, some other shipping company. What do you have to talk to with the UPS guy about? He's got a package for you. Just go to the door, sign for the package, and get on with your day. And he's got to get on with his, you know, shipments. So sometimes it can be more advantageous to just get a call button. So that way, you know, that this particular delivery person can just walk up, press the button, and somebody can come over to the door. You know, sometimes it can be more advantageous to get a call button just for the ease of use for both people that are interacting with it. Another huge use case that we have for the call buttons, specifically the indoor version, is when we're dealing with nursing or care facilities. So sometimes, you know, of course, we've got, you know, the special mods that we did for, say, the emergency intercom with a pull chain. So it's a little bit easier for people that are in beds to deal with. But sometimes just a simple button press is easy enough too. And what they can do is they can just implement the call button, and they can, you know, that person can press the call button, and it makes a call to that particular nurse station and tells them exactly what room they need to go visit. That can also be paired with one of our accessory strobe kit options that we'll get to in a moment, that can actually be implemented above the doorway outside of that particular room. So not only is the nurse station getting that, call notification, hey, need room in help 3, but there's also a nice blinky light on the outside of the building. So that way everybody knows that something's going on there. It might not be implemented in things like hospitals or things like that due to, potential privacy concerns or something like that. But it can definitely be advantageous in certain use cases just to kind of pair the call button with a strobe kit. And then finally, this is a big use case that I actually found kind of touring, what was it? I guess it was a couple weeks ago. I went over to go have dinner with my parents. I usually do that on Sunday nights. And my dad had just finished working on a motorcycle, had a couple beers, couldn't drive. So he's like, hey, you got to take me to work. I got to go start up all the air compressors and you can go walk around the floor. So we kind of did that. And of course, I got to see kind of the cool temperature sense tech that they're using to check everybody that comes in for COVID. They've got this cool little thermal camera to just kind of check your temperature, and you either get, a pass or, a fail, and you can enter the facility. But they've got basically a whole bunch of different CNC machines that they use to basically go and make different medical parts. And because these CNC machines, these big gigantic machines that take blocks of metal and make them into smaller little metal bits for different parts, are going to be pretty loud. So it wouldn't really make sense to say have an intercom at each particular station for them to call back to the storeroom and say, hey, I need more parts. So they actually use call buttons, not CyberData call buttons, but different call buttons. I'm pretty sure they're analog. Where they just press the button and it calls back to the storeroom and lets the storeroom know that this particular station needs more parts. So that way the people in the storeroom can get a part cart ready and they can go and pull all the parts that they need, get it on the cart and roll it over to that particular station. So in that situation, a standard intercom wouldn't work just because of the ambient noise level in this particular area. They're dealing with an ambient noise level that's, in the 90 to almost 100, depending on, what type of particular parts they're milling. So it can get extremely loud there. And because of that loudness, a standard intercom just frankly wouldn't work, no matter how good the echo cancellation is. When you're dealing with that high of an ambient noise level, you're not going to be able to hear it. So there are a lot of times that a call button can be more advantageous and more useful than a regular intercom. So finally, we can get into the Strobe Kit Accessory. And the Strobe Kit Accessory is one of the many accessories that we have for the intercom lines, but in my opinion, it's probably the most useful, strictly because of the paired visual notification that you get in addition to the auditory notification that you get from just the standard intercom or call button. So the Strobe Kit Accessory connects with the JX connection, which is very conveniently placed right next to the screw-down terminal of the intercom. So it makes all of the connections that you need to make to the intercom kind of one central place, so it's really easy for people to understand. And it's all nice and labeled on there. It's a nice big JX on the silk screen. It's very easy to see, although some people might need glasses, but it's relatively easy. So of course it connects to all the intercom products, everything using that same circuit board on the JX connection point. And on the actual strobe side, it connects to the J1 connection on there. It's the only connection, so it takes all the guesswork out of it. There's only one place to plug in the plug, so there's really no question to ask where it particularly gets implemented on the strobe board. But it's very, very useful, and we've of course got 2 different options for it. I thought I had that listed here. Oh, next page. And the strobe can, of course, illuminate on a whole bunch of different actions taken by the intercom or the call button. It can blink on different particular call states. So it can blink when it's in a call, when it's ringing, or when it's night ringing. It can also blink during multicast or blink when a particular sensor is triggered. So things like your door sensor, it can have a different kind of illumination based on whichever action it's taking. So of course the strobe kit that we have is both indoor and outdoor rated. The outdoor rated is currently IP65, but will soon be IP66. It's got the indoor version comes with a 1 meter cable. We do everything in meters for this. I don't know why. We're American and it should be feet, but we do have the feet conversion there. It's 3.3 feet for our indoor version, or 9.8 feet or 3 meter for our outdoor version. The outdoor version comes with a little bit of a longer cable just because of typically where the strobes would be installed in relation to the intercoms or call buttons. We found that a little bit longer cable was more advantageous for the outdoor version. We actually debuted this with a 3-meter conduit that was attached to an outdoor call button at a trade show, and we had that, strobe way up in the air that was actually above the booth, so it was really easy for people to see, almost like a nice little CyberData flag. One of the cool things for a strobe that, of course, sets us aside from other manufacturers of strobes, or we've got an easy adjustable brightness that's actually configurable based on the different actions that the strobe can take. And the same thing goes for the actual color pattern or blink pattern that can be used by the strobe. So the strobe can, of course, blink in a couple different patterns, where it can kind of a solid blink and fade out, or it can blink really fast. And it's got different iterations on the blink, but that brightness is also adjustable too. Typically, the brightness kind of gets set across the board where everybody just wants it as bright as possible, but you could have it dimmer if you wanted it to, say for a night ring, say if a lot of the lights are off and you don't necessarily need all that brightness, but you've got that flexibility per particular blink setting, as well as the color setting. So say, for example, you want your regular call related colors to be, say, blue or green, but then if your door sensor is triggered, you want it to blink red because that's more of an emergency, you can do that. So it makes the Strobe Kit a very, very useful accessory kit for all of our intercom related products. And it makes it really, really powerful. And in my opinion, is the most useful accessory kit that we have for the different intercoms.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.